Probably when we start talking about the future, when it comes down to money, we're actually looking at a lack of education, a lack of understanding, rational understanding of things like the markets, simple economic terms such as risk or utility function. When you end up in certain parts of the world where people don't understand the economics, a lot of the time they tend to do is actually build conspiracy theories, trying to fill in those knowledge gaps. And when we're talking about the liberty of having to play around with certain currencies, you also have to make sure that the market actually understands what they're doing and what the dangers are. I have in the past seen certain people trying to create their own ecosystems on the basis of templates that they found online, and actually having no substance and no technology behind Web3 concepts that they're trying to explain to the public. These are, of course, scammers. But then again, you find somebody from an economy that's been sheltered from the rest of the world, and you are trying to play on gullibility of the people who reside in those markets. You end up with quite a lot of risk that can be avoided as long as people are well educated, and as long as they actually understand how these things can be used in a safe manner. For that to happen, you need time, you need people to actually start being interested in it, and not just as hype, and not just as something of a gamble, but as something that's very rational. For that, of course, we need to develop a set of philosophies that would make sense, a set of ideologies, just as it was many, many years ago when we first were introduced to the market concept. Here we have the same idea. We need to start thinking about the market concept and rationalizing the philosophy and the usage of these things, and then getting the market to adopt it.
That would be the case if it were legal for them to participate in the upside of the networks they help create. But today, it's just not legal. So because it's not legal, nobody can do it. Because nobody can do it, they don't get to participate in the upside of these networks. And I know you're thinking of Bitcoin as an example case, but it's not really the same. If you were to try and do the same today with a new Twitter competitor or a Threads competitor or an Airchat competitor, you would get shut down by the SEC, even if you were just giving away tokens, even if you weren't charging for them. And as it should be the case with these things, I don't blame the politicians, I blame the voters. It's underinformed and ignorant voters who vote for authoritarians to take care of all their problems.
I'm not sure that's correct. And in addition, anytime anyone tells me that I can't do something because of regulations, I found that it's an opportunity rather than a prohibition that should invalidate an idea. So, for example, when we started Bit Reserve that became Uphold, everyone said, oh, you can't do that. That's money transmission. You better get 50 money transmission licenses and register with FinCEN and have a compliance department, et cetera, et cetera. And yes, you do need to have all those things eventually, but you didn't to take the first step and figure it out and try to build something that used this new decentralized system to do something. Likewise, when RTM was growing in Venezuela, RTM, I think you met Ruben during the Series A, introduced by Blue Yard. Everyone was like, oh my God, Venezuela, it's an OFAC country. We can't even touch you. You're going to go to jail. You're going to lose all your money, civil liability. And in fact, every step of the way, I had to step up and be the chief compliance officer because the chief compliance officers wouldn't go anywhere near something like this. Third case was most recently Cuba, helping young entrepreneurs there build something, Cuba Pay, which is like an AirTM for just the island, like a PayPal with a peer-to-peer network that gets around the regime. Everyone was like, oh my God, Cuba, that's the no-no. That's like Iran. That's like North Korea. It's even darker and worse than touching Venezuela. But it's not true. You can do it. You just have to be careful. You have to have a posture of compliance. You have to abide by the laws. And I think likewise here with securities laws, there's an opportunity rather than a prohibition. And I just disagree, and we'll see. Maybe you're right, but I believe that you can reward people for the work they do to create value in a network, and you can reward them for that work, they can then convert eventually those internal tokens, closed loop tokens, for a discount, and that discount could be to goods, services, or equity and ownership. And I believe that regulation crowdfunding allows that to happen, and not at the scale that perhaps giant VC-backed companies need, but yes, at the scale of a small startup that is trying to bootstrap a network and share the upside with the people that contribute to it, rather than divvying up the cap table ahead of time, hoping that people deliver, putting them on vesting schedules, and then giving a lot to VC, who just ultimately contribute capital, which is a commodity, and they make more of it every day. More money anyway, more fiat money. Anyway, those are my thoughts. Thanks for sharing, Naval.
I didn't wrap up the punchline because I'm exhausted, but the Uphold Coinbase went public, so what was once prohibited became accepted. AirTM ended up being used by Treasury to distribute funds under an OFAC license. So Venezuela wasn't that scary. Cuba Pay and the Cuban issue is also going to be resolved, I think, in the same way, because as long as you have a posture of compliance and you're trying to do the right thing, I think the regulatory system will allow you to innovate. That's been my experience. And I think with what Gensler's doing with the securities law and the SEC's authority is going to create a chaos where there's going to be a lot of opportunity to innovate. And that's what I'm going to try to do.
And the last thing I'd say is I'm not thinking about Bitcoin. Bitcoin is very different, decentralized, headless, fair start. I'm more talking about closed loop reward assets that founders can reward people who contribute to the building and value creation in their startup that can then be redeemed for ownership. They can be redeemed for other things too. They could be redeemed for access. They could be redeemed for collaboration opportunities, but they could also be redeemed for ownership of what would be a security under Reg CF offering of a security. And yes, it's limited, and there are caps to the amount you can raise, $5 million in 12 months, but $5 million for a small startup would be sufficient to get it to the next level, especially if it had low CAC and high growth, because the community that were also owners were spreading it and helping it grow, collaborating. It'd probably have lower engineering costs, etc. Anyway, thanks.
Killer. That was beautiful, Brian. I loved it. And I actually never thought about it that way, but that was actually a very beautiful way of thinking about it. And yes, whether he's right or wrong, time will tell. But man, I love that. I really love that. That's why I love this app. It's so different because I get to listen to people talking about things in ways that I would never, in my own way, have thought about them. This is beautiful. I'm loving it. Thanks so much. I so agree with this. I saw this here in South Africa, especially when Bitcoin was at its highest. The amount of scammers and these multi-level marketing gurus that came up and used the word Bitcoin everywhere, and people lost a lot of money, a lot of financial pain, and people were not aware, first of all, what Bitcoin is, what it does, what it's backed by. The entire concept of Bitcoin was just you get to make money. There was no philosophy behind it. So I agree with you 100%. And that gullibility was evidenced here in my community in South Africa. A lot of people lost a lot of money. I think underinformed and ignorant voters have got so much power, and it's in the interest of those people who have, who have better information to communicate it in a way that is relatable to those people. Because I think, I remember many times listening to politicians and thinking, wow, that's so correct, only to discover later on with more information, with more education, that, man, that was just manipulation. That was just manipulation. And I think highly intellectual people tend to forget that, or tend to not think about how important it is to make the ideas accessible and clear and easy to understand for those people who tend to be the most powerful, the voters, who are misinformed and, ignorant.